I want to start by thanking my ranking member, Senator Merkley, for joining us this morning and addressing a very important topic. I especially want to thank the witnesses for taking the time to be here this morning, but also for the very, very thoughtful and considerable effort that was put into really very comprehensive and very interesting testimony. So thank you for submitting that. Thanks for being here this morning. I need to explain a little interruption that we're going to have in this hearing this morning. We have votes scheduled on the Senate floor at 10 o'clock. 2 votes is my understanding. So Senator Merkley and I have agreed that the best way to handle this would be for Senator Merkley and I to give our opening statements, and then we will recess for the votes. We'll come back as quickly as we can. Hopefully, the members of the committee will be able to vote quickly on that second vote, return, and then we will welcome the testimony from the witnesses. So with that understood, I'll proceed with my opening statement, and then I'll recognize Senator Merkley. About 5 years ago, President Obama signed into law the Dodd-Frank Act, and he said at the time that, quote, "There will be new rules to make clear that no firm is somehow protected because it is too big to fail." Unfortunately, in my view, the Dodd-Frank Act did not end too big to fail. In fact, it enshrined it in law. In 2008, taxpayers were forced to pump certainly hundreds of billions of dollars in bailouts of floundering financial institutions. In response, in my view, rather than eliminating taxpayer bailouts, the Dodd-Frank legislation created an orderly liquidation authority which contains an explicit and limitless ability to draw on taxpayer resources. Let me be clear, I opposed the 2008 Wall Street bailouts then. I oppose them today, and I don't want to see any bailouts in the future. But Dodd-Frank created an explicit bailout mechanism. And it appears that the attempt to avoid using that is through massive regulation. We have a number of problems with this approach. First, the SIFI designation itself, in my view, confers this too big to fail status. And the overregulation that then is the attempt to avoid the bailout risks turning the financial sector into essentially public utilities. The regulations impose huge costs, both directly in terms of compliance costs and a diversion of resources, and the indirect costs that come when overly regulated firms are unable to lend as much as they otherwise would, unable to innovate as much as they otherwise would. And I think we should remember that regulators are neither omniscient nor perfect. An institution is likely to eventually fail despite the regulator's best efforts. They simply won't see it coming. And in fact, I think a persuasive argument has been made that the regulations could even increase the likelihood of failures by correlating risks. Now, Dodd-Frank deals with the possibility of a SIFI failure through the orderly liquidation authority, and I think there are many serious problems with this mechanism. One is regulators have an almost limitless discretion to force the liquidation. Secondly, there's really, under the legislation, there's no opportunity for a restructuring, which should be an option available to a failing institution. 3, the FDIC is essentially designated to control the bridge entity that's created in the Orderly Liquidation Authority, and I don't know that anyone really believes that the FDIC has the expertise to run a Lehman Brothers, for instance. The FDIC has unlimited discretion in how to treat comparably situated creditors, and I think that's completely inconsistent with every principle of bankruptcy. It's blatantly unfair. Some creditors could be favored relative to others who are similarly situated. I think you could argue that failure of a financial institution becomes, in fact, more likely because this discretion in the hands of the FDIC might cause a reasonable fear and suspicion on the part of some creditors that they might end up being on the short end of the stick in a resolution, and so they have an incentive to pull their line of credits as the first sign of trouble. And as I said earlier, the Orderly Liquidation Authority explicitly contemplates a taxpayer bailout. It creates the Orderly Liquidation Fund, and the Congressional Budget Office has scored the cost of this fund as a little over $20 billion over the next 10 years. That is their quantification of the risk. The taxpayers will have to step in and fund this. So Senator Cornyn and I want to thank Senator Crapo, I believe is a co-sponsor of the legislation. We've introduced the Taxpayer Protection and Responsible Resolution Act that addresses this too big to fail and this bailout risk head on. It repeals what I think is a dangerous and subjective orderly liquidation authority. It explicitly forbids taxpayer bailouts of failing institutions, and it replaces the orderly liquidation authority with a transparent, objective, and rule-based bankruptcy process by reforming the bankruptcy code so that it is able to handle the resolution of a large, complex institution. Bankruptcy, the reforms that we make in our legislation makes the Title I resolution of Dodd-Frank, I think, more credible. In my view, Title I of the Dodd-Frank Act is not inherently a bad idea. This institution should go through some resolution planning, but it has to be realistic, and that requires a bankruptcy code that can handle it. I think bankruptcy is superior to the orderly liquidation authority because creditors and shareholders should shoulder the losses if a financial institution fails, not taxpayers. Bankruptcy is transparent, it's a rule-based process, and it minimizes the risk of a creditor run in times of uncertainty. It is superior to OLA also because it maximizes the value of an estate by allowing either liquidation or a reorganization. And as we have contemplated the change in bankruptcy, it would allow for a bridge bank to ensure that you would not have systemic risks in the event of such a failure. So today, we're fortunate we'll be hearing from some of the world's leading experts on this question of how best to resolve a large, complex financial firm. Again, I want to thank the many experts who've helped with input on this legislation, the experts who are here today as witnesses. I look forward to their testimony and the question and answer period at the end. And at this time, I'll recognize Senator Merkley for his opening statement.